The United States is deliberating how to respond to an apparent chemical attack in Syria a little more than a week after President Trump said he intended to pull troops out of the country. On Friday, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders declined to say whether the president's thinking on that issue has changed in the wake of the attack. A recent op-ed in the Cipher Brief describes the advantages of a U.S. air campaign in Syria. Ambassador James Jeffrey wrote that piece. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Iran and Turkey, and he joins me now from Washington. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time being with us today. How would limited U.S. strikes in Syria impact the actions of the Assad regime and also of Russia?
First of all, the specific threat we have right now is the clear proof that the Assad regime has used some kind of chemical weapons. We don't know which kind, and the Trump administration's and other allies' readiness to take military action against that. Still, that is a one-time action to deal with a particularly horrific crime done by the Assad regime, which is chemical weapons. That doesn't really replace or serve as a policy. We do not yet have a policy toward Syria beyond fighting the remnants of ISIS in the northeast.
So you would favor then continued airstrikes as part of an overall strategy?
I would favor a continued use of air power rather than troops on the ground, and we have 2,000 of them in the northeast, for a different mission. It would be to maintain control over our allies, our local allies, Kurdish and Arab, in the northeast, and basically to deny that area to the Assad regime and their Iranian allies until we can get some kind of a resolution to this war that's been going on for 11 years, and that, rather 7 years, and the UN is trying its very best to try to fix.
And so then why pull all the troops on the ground out? I'm still unclear as how that would benefit our interests.
The troops are basically not combat troops to hold and seize terrain. They're advisors, they're support troops working with a 60,000 strong Arab Kurdish force. It's highly unlikely that that force needs those kind of American troops on the ground now if they have American air support. Secondly, the troops are themselves potentially targets of the Assad regime in retaliation. And thirdly, the Kurdish element of this force has been in a 40-year struggle with Turkey, our NATO ally to the north, and that's creating problems with our natural ally against Assad, Turkey, on the issue of our relationship with the Kurds in the northeast. This sounds terribly complicated, but it's the way this war is shaping out.
Sure, no, I understand. And then how would an increase in an air presence there affect our relationship with Russia?
Basically, as long as we're not bombing Russians and not using the air power to try to advance against Assad in a military campaign. We're not looking at that. The Turks, who are occupying a similar area with their local allies in the northwest, are not looking at that. It basically is to maintain pressure on the Assad regime to be clear that there will be no solution to this conflict until a resolution of the Assad regime's misgovernance of its own people and the Iranian military presence in Syria are dealt with in some way. It's in Russia's interest to try to work with us on that.
All right. And Ambassador, you write that some people on the president's national security team are pushing for a kind of, quote, nation-building plan in Syria. How do you think a stabilization plan like that would play out?
Well, the problem is we've had a lot of experience. I've had 3 years of experience doing it in Iraq. We are not very good at it, and it usually does not change the attitudes of the people on the ground, their loyalties, who they want to fight, who they want to partner with. And it is a recipe for keeping troops on indefinitely for a very peripheral mission, which is to keep ISIS, this terrorist force that has been almost defeated, from coming back in a very small area of Syria. It's not a mission we want to keep our troops on the ground to do.
Sure. And Ambassador, let's say the U.S. does pull its troops and pull all air support out of Syria. What would Syria look like? How will that country rebuild on its own, and who would sort of be in charge?
Well, it would be a disaster if we pulled our air power out. My argument is it's the ground troops that are the problem. It's not the air power. The air power needs to stay to keep the Russians and Syrians out of the northeast, to protect the people who fought with us against ISIS, including against ISIS, but also primarily to exert military political pressure on the Russians, because this conflict is not going to end until we and the Turks and the Israelis stop operating militarily in Syria, and the Russians know that.
Ambassador James Jeffrey, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.